So I read 6 books in February, but I've actually already talked about 5 of them in a previous video. So for this February wrap up, I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, and then in the back half of the video, I'm actually going to use the almighty TBR jar to pick some of my reads for March. So after a quick sip of tea, let's get into it. The first book that I read, of course, was House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. This was intense to jump into right at the beginning of February. The last book that I read in January was House of Sky and Breath. We all know how that one ends at this point. So the first bit of this book was super exciting, super high adrenaline, so much is going on. I felt like I was on the edge of my seat at all times and I could never catch my breath. And then it just kind of falls off a cliff after that. So I think the main issue that I had with this was just the pacing of this book. The entire thing takes place within a week, whereas the other books that are of similar lengths in this series take place over a couple weeks or even a couple months. So the pacing of this one felt weird and a little bit awkward. The amount of perspectives that we were jumping, even just in the middle of chapters, we would read one chapter and there would probably be 2, 3, sometimes 4 perspective changes. That was a bit jarring. It was hard to kind of dig deep and settle into a character because you weren't going to be with them for very long on the page. The pacing was difficult. The perspectives were awkward. I felt like there wasn't enough development of that many characters to jump all the perspectives. It's hard not to compare all of her series to each other. As I'm reading Crescent City, I'm thinking about ACOTAR, I'm thinking about Throne of Glass, and I'm comparing what did I like in those that I didn't like in this one, just to try to find language for it for myself. I just want to understand. In ACOTAR, it's a first-person perspective for the most part. At least the first 3 books we're obviously focusing on Feyre. So it's very easy to get into the world, it's very easy to get into the story because we're just getting one perspective. By the time we jump to Nesta's perspective, we're 3 books and a novella into these characters. So at the point that we reach the 4th full book, we're able to jump around to Nesta and Cassian and even Azriel a bit more because I know them so well. It doesn't feel as jarring to me. Same in Throne of Glass. In the beginning, you are just on Aelin's perspective the entire time. But by Kingdom of Ash, you are jumping around to so many different characters. And I think that it worked because she slowly introduced them. In Crescent City, it just didn't feel like we had enough time to get to know all of the characters that we were following. So by the time the 3rd book rolls around, I'm jumping around to these characters that I've spent very little time with. I don't know them that well, and so it's hard for me to connect and feel the emotions of really intense moments because it just wasn't as believable in that moment. So I was certainly hoping for a little bit more of certain characters that are introduced in the beginning, and that was a bit of a letdown. I feel like I'm saying only negative things about it. I did really like it. I was invested. I was emotional over certain parts. It just fell flat compared to some of her other books. I gave it a 3.5. Overall, disappointed, but still a good and enjoyable book. Just not what I was hoping for. So, next book was Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This one was super enjoyable, especially coming off of House of Flame and Shadow, which is over 900 pages, super dense, and full of an incredible amount of details. This one was really simple, but not in a bad way. It was actually refreshing to just know what's going on. This is a book where you're kind of following the characters, but as the reader, you actually have more of the story than they do. So you know what's going on and you're kind of waiting for the characters to catch up. And in this case, that was actually kind of nice because I was just relaxed while reading it. I wasn't asking a ton of questions. I wasn't stressed. It was just like a chill, vibey read. It follows Rowan and Iris, who are writing letters back and forth to each other, and they fall in love over these letters, and they are correspondents in this fantastical kind of godly war that's going on in their world. They go to the front lines of this war and they're reporting on it while, you know, questions are being asked about the gods that started it. And so you don't really know a lot of the origins about the war, but you're kind of figuring it out the same time that Iris and Roman are. Did I say Rowan in the beginning? Whatever. His name is Roman, not Rowan. I've got Aelin and Rowan on the mind. It was really great. I love the letter writing aspect of it. It's one of my favorite components in novels if it's used well, and in this case it was used really, really well. Major You've Got Mail vibes. Big fan of that. I rated this a 4 stars. It was just wonderful and delightful and so easy to follow, so easy to read, loved the characters, loved the story. I think the reason that it's not a 5-star is because there were some things where maybe the love story happened a little bit too fast and a little bit too easily, but at the same time, I kind of wanted that at that point. I didn't want to be stressed and on the edge of my seat the entire time waiting for things to happen, so it was really great. Highly recommend, which leads me to the next book that I read, Ruthless, Vows, which is the second book in the Divine Rivals series. It's also the conclusion of the series. It's just a duology. And this one was sad for me because I was hoping for a lot. I was expecting a lot out of it. I'm not really going to go into the story in depth just because it is a new book and I think a lot of people are still reading it. And the last book, Divine Rivals, ends up on a pretty big cliffhanger. So this book, there were a lot of answers that needed to be given. There was a lot of backstory with the war and the gods that I needed answers to. I think that the author, Rebecca Ross, is really, really so good at crafting sentences, so good at having lyrical descriptions, and it's very poetic, it's very beautiful without being hard to understand, but the story crafting in this one was not where I wanted it to be. It felt like she had written herself into a bit of a corner with Divine Rivals, and then all of a sudden in this book, she needed to answer all of these questions. She needed to plug up all of these plot holes, and she just kind of did it half-heartedly is what it felt like, which is really unfortunate because if this book could have landed well, this would be a 5-star series for me. It was set up to be close to perfection, and unfortunately, it just fell pretty flat for me. There were a lot of coincidences. There were a lot of things that felt quite phoned in with the plot. I didn't love the development of Iris and Roman's love story in the end. You barely got any of them, honestly. They were never really together on the page. Mostly ended the series with more questions and frustrations than I started with, and then that I was hoping for. So this one, unfortunately, I rated a 2.5. I was just not into it at that point. So that was sad. Which brings me into the next one though, The Serpent and the Wings of Night. This one I was not expecting to like as much as I did. One, because I didn't realize when I picked it up that this is a vampire book. I've never read a vampire book before, and I think in my mind I never have because I've just inherently avoided Twilight as much as possible. So any vampire book I see, I'm like, nah, not into it, don't want anything to do with that. But this one is a vampire book. It doesn't feel very traditional though. I think that the author, Carissa Broadbent, took a lot of creative liberties with The Serpent and the Wings of Night, and I really enjoyed the spin that she put on just vampire lore and everything. So it kind of follows our main character, Oriah, as she is adopted into this vampire world as a human. She's weak, she's powerless, and she's kind of the like princess of this world because she's adopted by the king of the vampires, or he's a very powerful figurehead in their community, but she is literal food for them. So she enters these trials, these games, and if she wins, she can basically become really powerful. She can be granted a wish or a gift from this goddess that kind of runs the game. So that's her motivation for going into it. She meets some people in there. She falls in love with some people in there. She betrays some people in there. People betray her, and there's so many things happen. The 3 books that I read before this were all urban fantasy, and they were all third-person perspective. And as soon as I got into this one, which is first-person perspective and kind of more classic high fantasy, I didn't realize how much I was missing that and craving that. And so it was really refreshing to switch it up in that way and kind of go back to the genre that I enjoy, because I'm not usually a huge fan of urban fantasy, but for whatever reason I just read a lot of it in the beginning of February. So it was really nice to go to The Serpent and the Wings of Night. It was really nice to go to first person perspective again. I felt like the pacing of this book was so perfect because I was on the same page as the main character Araya basically the whole time. My emotions matched hers as she was figuring things out. I was figuring things out. There wasn't really a point where I felt like I was ahead of her or behind her. It just was very natural and easy to read in that way. So I rated this 5 stars. Who's to say if I rated it 5 stars because I was just tired of urban fantasy and third person and needed a break from it, but I enjoyed it so much, and yeah, 5-star read, baby. Next book I picked up, Powerless by Lauren Roberts. I picked this one up mostly because of booktube and the bookish corners of the internet, because everybody is talking about it, everybody loves it. I've seen so many people give it 5 stars. I've seen so many people just claiming to be absolutely obsessed with it, and so I was mostly curious when I saw it at the bookstore, just because I wanted to see what people were raving about, what was the deal with it. And I think this is a bit of a classic example of a bandwagon, people jumping on the bandwagon just because they want to and not really because they have those same thoughts and opinions. I thought it was good, and I actually, after learning that this was her debut novel, I think it's better. However, it felt at sometimes a bit juvenile. It felt sometimes a bit cringy. I'm not sure if this is officially YA, but I think it is. And it just fell a little bit flat for me, specifically coming off of The Serpent and the Wings of Night, because they are very similar stories. They both take place kind of around trials or games. The main character of each of them, Araya in Serpent and the Wings of Night, this one is Payton, and just like the previous book, keep saying Serpent and the Wings of Night, just like the last book, she is powerless, she is weak compared to the rest of the people in the society. The society is built around kind of magic and people having gifts, and if you don't have gifts, you're considered ordinary, and really, like, you just gotta go, you're gonna die or you're gonna get banished. So Payton doesn't have any powers, so she's trying to figure out where she fits in society and how that all works. So she's sent into these games, because if you go into the games, you'll get riches and your life will change, all this type of stuff, the usual things. The whole thing was too long, for sure. This is like a 500-page book of tiny text, and it was too long. It needed to be at least 100 pages shorter, because there were things that were just dragged out that didn't need to be dragged out. The dialogue was, like I said, a bit juvenile a lot of times. It's just like, people don't really talk that way, even in completely made up fantasy worlds. So it was kind of hard for me to connect with the characters and to get into it. But it was really enjoyable still. There were a couple scenes that I thought were really well written, and I see potential for this series to get a lot better. It kind of reminded me of the level of Throne of Glass, the first book, where that one is just so drastically different and not as good as the rest of the books. That's potentially an unpopular opinion, but this kind of felt like that. But I see the potential in remaining books in the series. I'm not sure how many are planned, but I think I will read it. I will pick it up again. I rated this one a 3.5, so pretty good, honestly, pretty good, but yeah, that's Powerless. And then the last book of February was The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. I have been trying to read this one for a long time, maybe since it even came out. I picked it up a while ago and read maybe 50, maybe 100 pages of it, and I think I was in a reading slump because I couldn't get through it. I was very uninterested in the story. I was very uninterested in the characters, and so I stopped reading it. I decided this month to try again, pick it back up, and I think as I was going through it, I'm not sure if the reason I couldn't get through it last time was because I was in a reading slump. I actually think it's kind of hard to get into. This one was interesting. It's described as dark academia, which I think is accurate. The vibes were pretty cool and cozy, but right off the bat, you are introduced to 6 new completely different and separate from each other characters. It's all third-person perspective, and so it was really hard to get to know the characters because every single chapter I'm switching to somebody new. It follows these 6 characters: Libby, Nico, Tristan, Callum, Raina, Parisa. They become initiates to enter the Alexandrian Society, which is a society of magical people that protect Alexander's library, which possesses all the knowledge in the world. So it's very important that they protect this library. And so it's the 6 of them as they go into this year-long stint of protecting the library, but at the end of it, they're gonna have to kill one of the 6 initiates. So nobody trusts each other in this book. Everybody is suspicious of everybody, which is really difficult as a reader because when you're on a chapter of certain characters, the only thing that they're really talking about and thinking about is, this person gonna kill me right now? I don't like this person. I don't trust this person. And so as an ensemble, I felt like I was just reading about 6 disconnected puzzle pieces that were not fitting at any time for me. I think that Olivia Blake is a really, really great writer in the same way that Rebecca Ross is a great writer, where the individual sentences that she has are so beautiful. There were a couple paragraphs that I had to write down just because I've never heard words strung together that way. But I would get to the end of a chapter and be so confused at what happened. She says so much, but also at the same time says nothing. And so I went through this one pretty slowly because I just was a little bit confused a lot of the time. I think that the world building was just not really there. It wasn't super well explained. And I've said this before, but I'm a big character reader. I will stick with a book. I'll get into a book and enjoy it if I enjoy the characters. And it was so difficult for me to enjoy any of the characters. 1, because I never spent any time with them. And 2, they're all kind of on edge at all times, and they're all kind of mean to each other, and they're all suspicious of everybody, and so it just was like not fun to read. I think I'm sitting with this one at like probably a 2.75. It's not as bad to me as Ruthless Vows, only because the writing style is so beautiful, and the vibes of the dark academia was more enjoyable to me than Ruthless Vows, but I just was confused a lot of the time. I think I will pick up the next 2 books in the series, but I might take a little break first. So that was February. A lot of the books were not quite up to what I was expecting them to be. I started a lot of the books with really high expectations and was generally disappointed in them. But Divine Rivals, the first book, was really, really great, and The Serpent and the Wings of Night was also really, really great. So that was February. Now, I would like to choose my March TBR list using the TBR jar. I don't know any of the prompts in this jar because my husband wrote them all down. So let's just start. Let's get into it. I'm probably gonna choose 5 for this month just to keep it kind of attainable and also leave a little bit of room in case I wanted to add some more books later. But first one is a book or TV movie adaptation. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, there are not a lot of options on my bookshelf, to be completely honest, but I do have Shadow and Bone in the Grishaverse. I wouldn't say I'm particularly excited to read this, but I also do need to get through it. It's been on my shelf for a really long time. I even tried to read it a while ago, but I read it directly after reading the Six of Crows duology, which I love Six of Crows. And then I started Shadow and Bone and I was just disappointed, and I missed all of the Six of Crows characters, and I just wasn't really interested in it at all. So I haven't read it yet. I just kind of want to get it off my shelf and mark it off as done. And also I don't think there's a lot of other options right now that I have for an adaptation. So we're gonna add Shadow and Bone to the list. Let's see what's next. A book with a great first sentence. This one's interesting. So it's from the Midnight Library. The title chapter is A Conversation About Rain. And the first sentence is, 19 years before she decided to die, Nora Seed sat in the warmth of a small library. I like that. I'm intrigued. I'm into it. So we're gonna make this the second from the TBR jar. A genre you usually don't read. So we're probably gonna be looking at like a mystery or a thriller or something. Okay. The Turn of the Key. Definitely not a book that I had on my immediate radar, but the synopsis at the end of it says, it's full of spellbinding menace, and it's told in a signature suspenseful style. It's an unputdownable, one word, unputdownable, thriller from the Agatha Christie of our time. That's some high praise right there. So, Turn of the Key. Number 4, a book with pink on the cover. Okay, too difficult? This book is entirely pink. Severance by Ling Ma. I got this from Book of the Month a long time ago, and I don't really remember what it's about at all, but it is fully pink, and this is the point of the TBR jar, is for me to pick up books that have been on my shelf for a long time and I've literally forgotten everything about. So here we go. And the last pick that I'm gonna do, the 10th book down on any column. So, as you can see here, I don't have bookshelves, but I have a book stack with a lot of columns in it. And so I'm gonna pick a column and I'm gonna go 10 books down and see what pops up. I'm a little scared of this one, but what you gonna do? I don't even know where or why I got this book, but I have it. So this looks like a romance book with some fun stuff in it. So that's it. This is my stack for March. A lot of variety here to pick through. I'm a little bit scared, to be honest, but it'll be fun. All right, let's get into it.